Yes. Hello, Simon.
Yes. Hello.
Uh,
Hello,
Simon,
Igor.
yeah, hi there. Simon is the founder and chief executive officer of Milltrust, a family-owned investment platform overseeing investments across liquid markets, mainly developing equity markets, and some very interesting projects as well, like farmland in remote parts of the world, such as Australia and New Zealand. And he also takes part in other very interesting initiatives like climate impact and wildlife projects. And his presentation today is not about wildlife, it's about mobility of high net worth individuals. And Simon, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Igor. It's so good to see you after all these years and reconnect. I spend most of my life in Singapore and in Asia, but I'm speaking to you today from London. Can you hear me okay? You
Yes,
hear me well?
yes,
That's
yes.
great.
We can hear you,
Well,
we can see you.
Tasia asked me to speak about global mobility. And I think originally a lot of the focus of this panel was going to be on citizen by investment, residents by investment, and so forth. I am by no means an expert on these areas. So what I'll be talking to you about is trends in global mobility and how we, as a business that services family offices around the world with investment ideas and investment strategies, think about these trends. I have got a few slides. I'm going to open up the slides if I can manage the technology. 1 second. So, can you see the slides now, Igor?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so first a little bit of information about who we are and what we do. 11 years ago, I moved from Europe to Asia in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, largely to focus on what I thought was going to be the area of greatest growth in the world, Asia, but also to focus on a wider mandate to invest into the developing countries of the world. And today, we run a range of public equity market funds, all of which look at the world through the lens of sustainability. So we focus on ESG with a particular focus on environmental impact. And those funds are award-winning funds. They've done extremely well. They're in the top 1% of performance of all emerging market funds worldwide. And we're very proud of that track record. And we've been an award-winning asset manager in the region. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of is our joint association with the WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, which in its Hong Kong office focuses on work across the whole of Asia, particularly on conservation, on biodiversity, on species extinction programs. And so we give 40% of the fee income that we generate from our climate impact initiatives to WWF, and they help keep us on track by making sure that in the decarbonization world, we are investing in the right companies. But we're also involved in sustainable farmland. We have over 20,000 hectares of farmland investments, all of which have been made through the lens of environmental impact, and all of which we believe are sustainable farming, designed to produce food and fiber for an ever-growing global population, particularly driven, of course, by the huge growth and the urbanization of the developing world. The third area, which harks back to Pavel's presentation, but comes in at a much earlier stage, is our investments in breakthrough science and technology. And here, again, we're looking at investments that we believe are going to be life-transforming, businesses that we do believe can impact billions of people. And our success stories range from backing the Oxford vaccine platform that is the genesis of the AstraZeneca vaccine that has been distributed globally in greater quantities than any other vaccine in many developing countries at zero profit. The company itself that we invested in, Vaccitech, listed on NASDAQ earlier this year, and from investing at a value of a few million dollars, that is a company now which is worth somewhere in the region of $500 to $600 million as a listed company. So there are many opportunities to invest very early on in venture and with the right kind of expertise to identify the right companies to back long-term sustainable trends which we believe are going to be life-transforming for millions of people on this planet. So we call our business a global wealth management company, and we live by the mantra of sustainable prosperity. But coming back to this idea of trends in global mobility, Igor, I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that I have been unable to return to Singapore during the crisis. I have been living there with my family. I have my business there. But because of the very tight restrictions that have been placed on international travel, and particularly the rules governing entry into Singapore, my life has had to take a different turn. International travel in many parts of the world has been restricted. Global mobility has been severely crimped. And I believe that international travel is being discouraged and will continue to be discouraged in the years ahead. This is a huge contrast with the globalization that we have seen over the course of the post-Cold War era, when the world moved a great deal closer and international travel permitted us to move around the globe with alacrity. But of course, today, the restrictions on global movement are having a very significant impact on global supply chains. Here in the United Kingdom, there is a fear that we may have a fuel crisis. Gas prices are going through the roof. Certain foods are unavailable. One of the well-known high street restaurants, Nando's, had to close 200 restaurants because they couldn't procure enough chicken. They are a grilled chicken restaurant. And this isn't only linked to the pandemic. It is a much bigger agenda that is driven by the climate crisis and the fact that governments are taking fairly radical steps to slow down global movement. You may recall that some years ago, in recent history, the price of commodities, when they increased significantly, led to very significant global unrest, none more so than in the Arab world, particularly in the Maghreb of North Africa, where because of the increase in bread prices, a local baker self-immolated in Tunisia, and that precipitated the Arab Spring, a movement of global unrest driven by people who are essentially very poor people and for whom putting bread on the table or putting the basic staples on the table is enormously important. It's a great irony that in the context of the global pandemic, which now has been raging for 2 years, many people in places like Silicon Valley have seen their wealth increase very significantly. And yet people at the other end of the global supply chains, the people that stitch our Nike shoes in Vietnam, a country that, by the way, is currently in many areas under martial law and where food is delivered to your home by the military, have found that their livelihoods have been very severely impacted. So global mobility is changing very dramatically, and it is having a very significant impact on the global landscape. What are the things that my clients and all of us, I'm sure, think about when we're trying to determine where we might live in the world? There are, I think, a number of issues that globally mobile entrepreneurs and business people consider. One that is often mentioned, illustrated by my little image on the left, is ease of doing business. Are you living in a part of the world where the regulatory framework is favorable, where the tax regime is favorable towards business, where you can come together as suppliers and customers in a framework that works efficiently? I think the second consideration that many people raise is health. Are you living in a country where the healthcare facilities at your disposal, particularly as we get older, are able to provide you with the safety net that you need? Can you get excellent healthcare? Is there a national framework like we have here in the United Kingdom of the National Health Service that will not exclude you in the event that you fall foul of illness? The third area, which of course is enormously important, is education. And it's often a driver for people in Asia to send their children to the United Kingdom, to the US, to Canada, to Australia. And it makes life suddenly more complicated, particularly if you've got children who live and reside in the US, who need a green card, who may aspire to become citizens, and whose international tax residency and domicile may inevitably change. And then one of the other considerations for global mobility today is culture. Do you want to be able to live a life where you pursue your cultural interests and your religious interests freely in a place where there is freedom of expression? Or are you happy to compromise those in order to live in a place where you consider that the trade-off is worthwhile in terms of your ability to make money? And then finally, personal tax. Personal taxation is often called the tail that wags the dog, which is a terrible metaphor, because in my view, whilst personal tax is important, some of the speakers today are great examples of how you can live and operate in parts of the world that have fairly aggressive tax regimes, but where the opportunity to make money far exceeds those in places where there is no tax. So this is really a slide that comes back to this issue of residency or citizenship through investment. And if you are a South African or you are an Indian and you want to live an international life and move around the world for business purposes and live in other parts of the world, your opportunity set is going to be significantly crimped by the passport that you hold. And therefore, there may be opportunities for you to acquire another passport or another residency. And that is typically divided into three different groups. I would say the first group are easily obtainable. They do provide widespread visa-free travel, but the countries tend to be small, and there is a bit of a credibility gap if you present a passport from St. Kitts and Nevis when dealing with certain official interactions that you may have in your life. There will be questions asked about substance. There will be questions asked about whether you really live in these places in order to benefit from the passports that you can effectively buy off the shelf for a relatively modest contribution to these economies. The more serious passports, I guess, in the EU, and it is possible to buy an EU passport, or certainly to obtain residency, which will lead you to the ability after a certain amount of time to procure European passport, are typically places like Cyprus, Malta, but in more recent years, Montenegro, places like Portugal, and even the United Kingdom, where obviously the sums of money start to jump up. But countries like Italy and Portugal have offered very attractive tax frameworks that you can benefit from if you make a significant investment in these countries. And in the post-pandemic era, I don't think we're going to see this slow down. Perhaps a decade ago, there may have been a sense that these passport opportunities would be ultimately phased out. But in the current climate, where governments are desperate for additional funding, I think you're going to see more of these types of initiatives, which may prompt more global mobility for those who find that mobility is a challenge given the passports that they are born with. I wanted to give you, perhaps just finally, before we talk about other topics or deal with one or two questions from the audience, Igor, I wanted to give you an example of one of my hedge fund manager clients who runs his business in Shenzhen and Shanghai, but lives in San Francisco. And I asked him why he had chosen to live in San Francisco rather than living in China. And he gave me a whole host of responses. First of all, he said that living in China, I'm 163 times more likely to die in a car accident than I am in San Francisco. My life expectancy living in the United States will be well into my 80s for me and my family, but living in China